This happened a few years ago with my friend June, when we were maybe 17 or 18. I'm 23 now, by the way. We were out driving around late at night on the country back roads. We were teenagers growing up in a rural area, so going for a drive was one of the main ways we used to pass the time. We were both into goth stuff and witchcraft at the time, so we pulled off the side of the road to walk around a small graveyard settled into the woods. It was impossible to see at night, but we'd gone there a few times the day before just to hang out a bit. The whole area was heavily forested, but the path to the graveyard was very short. It's right next to the road, just barely hidden off into the woods. Anyway, we started slowly on the small loop that takes you around all the gravestones, using our flashlights to read off the names and look at the carvings of the various stones. I was very comforted by graveyards and the night at the time, so honestly I was very relaxed. We mused about ghosts and death and whatnot, as goth teenagers tend to do. About halfway around the loop, at the furthest point from the car, June got my attention as she'd noticed a light shining in the woods. It looked far away, like it could have been a car on the road or something, so we turned away and decided to keep walking. However, about 30 seconds later, she got my attention again. This time the light was much closer, and obviously quickly moving towards us. Then I heard the sound of someone crashing through the woods. It was obviously someone with a flashlight, making a beeline right towards where we were. We backtracked and ran to the car. I unlocked it and climbed into the driver's seat, turning it on as fast as I could. Right before the lights came on, this huge, grisly-looking man dressed head to toe in camouflage, carrying a huge crossbow, and wearing a headlamp busted out of the foliage. He was coming right for our car. He had this manic look in his eyes that just made me want to escape even more. I reversed as quickly as I could and peeled out of there. We didn't stop driving for a while, even though we never saw him following us after we drove off. We just couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, though. Finally, I think we both got too tired to stay out any longer, and we went back to our respective houses. I constantly think about how quickly he got to us. If we hadn't sprinted right when we did, he would have caught us as we were getting into the car. I literally slammed my door shut, only about a second before he came barreling out of the woods right towards us. Plus, the fact was that there were no houses anywhere nearby. This person was waiting in the woods, in full hunting gear with a weapon, and we clearly weren't animals. We had a flashlight with us shining into the dark, and there wasn't a no trespassing sign in sight. The whole area around the graveyard is a state park, in fact. I go out into the woods and into weird places at night a lot, and I've seen some stuff I would consider supernatural that really scared me. But none of those things ever truly made me afraid to go into the woods, quite like this man did. I still go out on my own, but I never let my guard down like I used to. This story takes place in August of 2013 in the mountains of southern Oregon. I'm a USAF Security Forces airman, military police essentially. My girlfriend was at work, and it was a swelteringly hot day. It began to turn into thunderstorms. My buddy Nick, another military cop, and I decided to go explore some back roads and get out of the heat in town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with various logging roads, some actively used but many totally forgotten and completely grown over. Nick and I spent many of our days off starting on roads that we knew, finding roads we didn't know, and driving for hours into the mountains, eventually navigating our way back to paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we had never been on and began to drive into the mountains. After driving for around an hour, we hadn't seen nor heard any signs of anybody else in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods and emerged in a meadow that was surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed the strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a solitary picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted a bright orange and was much larger than a typical table at a park. Remarking on this strangeness, Nick drove us through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was just exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the aspen grove was completely unsettling. Also, it was nearly impossible to see very far into the trees, as aspens grow extremely close to each other. When we parked by the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check the area out. I'm not very tall at all, only about 5'5" regardless. The table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at my chest level, meaning I would have to climb up to even attempt to sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the aspens. At first, I couldn't see just what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place within these thick trees. There was a small one-man tent set back into the trees about 50 feet from the strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread and felt certain there was someone in the tent. If we could see it, they could see us. There were no campgrounds in this area, no people, no main roads for miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be, at the very least, a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" I yelled. No reply. Feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area. But we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in the tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought it all the same. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camp. Should we need to leave in a hurry, he would be waiting just behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees toward the tent. I was totally keyed up, with my senses all on full alert. When I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. There were backpacks scattered all over. No fire had been built, and no wood collected. The tent was literally stuffed with backpacks and various women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave and tell Nick what I had seen. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling, "Let's go! Let's get the fuck out of here!" I don't know why he was yelling. I just ran back to the truck as fast as I could. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford Taurus parked on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt into the passenger seat, and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men, and a third person was laying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from coming out the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way we came from. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without ever seeing the car again. I still don't know if the person in the back was male or female. I called the state police, and they promised to send a trooper to check out the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the backpacks, and the woman's clothing were all gone. He could tell, though, that people had definitely been in the area. The strange table was still by the thick aspen grove. I've not returned to the area since, and to be honest, I don't intend to. When I was 11, my family lived in Alaska, about 14 miles north of Anchorage. As soon as you leave the actual city of Anchorage, you're in the wilderness pretty damn quickly. This event happened to me in the summer of 1977. I remember because the original Star Wars had just come out just a few weeks before, and I was completely obsessed with it at the time. In 1977, the town I lived in was actually just a series of roads and off-roads. Most of the people there commuted to Anchorage for work. That's what my parents did as well. They both worked nights, meaning I spent most of my time alone at home. I don't have any siblings. Our house was about a half-mile in from the nearest paved road, and surrounded by woods. I didn't really have any friends that lived close by. I knew a kid who lived at the end of my road, though. He was actually the next closest house, and was still about 300 yards from mine. One afternoon that summer, I was watching TV when there was a knock at our side door. I looked outside, and saw it was the kid from the end of the street with someone else. I opened the door, and he told me this kid was his cousin whose family had flown up from wherever they were from to visit. I can't remember the kid's name, to be honest. I do remember being immediately nervous around this guy, though. He had blonde hair down to his shoulders, wore a t-shirt under a thin leather vest, and he also had one of those wallets on a chain. This kid's eyes were dark as hell. I was 11 and hadn't ever seen evil before, but this kid set off something in my small brain. Even the boy from down the street seemed to be genuinely nervous around him. He said he had told his cousin about my BB gun and how cool it was. I had recently just been given one as a gift. I told him to wait outside and I would go in and get it. I just knew I didn't want that kid in my house, though. I got the BB gun and went outside, and handed it over to the weird kid. He rolled it over in his hands and looked it up and down without his expression ever changing. Without handing it back, he asked me, "How much do you want for it?" I can't remember my reaction after all these years, but I didn't really need money, and the gun was a gift, so I told him it wasn't really for sale. I also remember apologizing for some strange reason. Unfazed, the kid hands the gun back to me, then reaches behind his back and pulls out the biggest damn knife I'd ever seen. I remember thinking for a second that it was a sword even. If you've ever seen the movie Crocodile Dundee, where he tells some robbers, "That's not a knife, this is a knife," and pulls out the huge knife, well, that's the kind this kid had. The kid then said, "How about a trade, then?" I shot the BB gun at cans. What was I going to do with this thing? Hunt a grizzly bear? I declined the offer nervously, and the kid turned away and started walking in the direction of their house. I went back inside and decided to watch some more TV. About an hour later, though, there was another knock at the door. I go to our side window from which I can see the door. I peek out, and sure enough, it's that same weird kid again. This time, though, he was alone. The second time he knocked was louder. He called my name, but I stayed quiet. At this point, he left the door and started walking around our house. My mother had a sunroom where she grew plants. It had large windows all along the wall. I saw him walking by those windows, pressing his face up against the glass and cupping his eyes, trying to see deep into the house. I stayed out of sight, though. Luckily, there were no lights on, and I had the knowledge to turn the TV off when I heard the knock. When he couldn't see anything, he continued around the house. He then pulled out that huge knife and began tapping the butt of the handle along the outer wall as he circled. He then started saying, "Hey, I know you're in there." I almost shit myself. Of course he knew I was in the house. I was 11, home alone. How could I have left by myself? Hop in a car and just take off? Hell, both of our cars were gone anyway. I continued keeping low and quiet, hoping he might think I went to a friend's house somewhere else. Just how long could this psycho circle the house anyway? He was maybe 14. He'd get bored pretty quickly. But no such luck. This kept on for about an hour, the tapping, and his voice telling me to come out, and that he had another better trade for my gun. Screw that. I had gone all in on the "I'm not home" tactics, so I stayed quiet and made my way to the kitchen where our telephone was. This was 1977, mind you. No cell phones, and our phone was attached to a wall in the kitchen. Luckily, though, it had a super long handset cord. I got it, stayed low to the floor, and called my mother at work. She took me seriously, but there was no way she could get home. My dad was in the Air Force as well, and I'm sure they wouldn't let him skip out early to handle his son's crisis. I would have to ride it out by myself. The sun had gone down, and by that, I mean it was just barely peeking above the horizon. In the summer, the sun never completely went down in our area. The kid kept pacing around for another 30 minutes or so, and then suddenly, he was just gone. Not being an idiot in a horror movie, though, I stayed down the whole time and kept quiet. Eventually, my parents got home, and I was still awake. They brushed it off, as if to say, "See, nothing to worry about." I never hung out with the kid down the street again, and I pretty much stayed inside the remainder of the summer. There was just something wrong with that kid. Maybe it was in my head, or maybe he would have done something absolutely brutal to me just to get a damn BB gun. At the time this happened, I was about 12 years old, and a member of a unisex scouts group, one of about 4 girls in our troop. We went to a jamboree with loads of other scout groups, and camped there for a few nights. During the day, we did a range of activities, a lot of which were based in a wooded area, very close to the area we were camping in. Every night there was some sort of entertainment for us to go to if we wanted. On the first night, the other girls and I started talking to a group of older guys who were also camping with their troop for a few days. They were pretty nerdy, and we weren't particularly attracted to them, but they seemed nice and we had a very good laugh with them. Whenever we saw them for the next couple of days, we would say hi and chat whenever we could. It was nice to talk to some other boys other than the ones in our group. The boys in our troop were older than me, and were pretty protective of us girls. They always made sure these other boys knew they were with us, and we felt pretty safe being at a scout event with the older boys watching over us. The night before we left, we had a disco. Everyone got dressed up, and we went along to dance and listen to the music. By this point, we had gotten to know the boys pretty well, or at least as well as we could have in a couple of days. At the disco, a couple of the boys asked me if I wanted to go for a walk, in view of the disco, and just hang out away from the scout leaders, as it was our last night there. Me and another girl decided to go off with them, but we weren't far from the disco, and we could hear and see everything that was going on. After a while, my friend needed the bathroom, so she headed back towards the disco tent. I stayed where I was, and kept hanging out with these boys. Big mistake. Looking back, I should have gone back with her. Just how well could I possibly know these boys? But at 12 years old, I was of course very naive, and didn't think anything bad could happen with so many people around. They suggested we head back, but take a slightly longer route around, so we could see the stars. Suddenly, one of the boys grabbed a hold of my hand, and I felt kind of uncomfortable, but was really shy back then, and I didn't know what to do in this unforeseen situation. I saw him shine a light on our hands and wink over at his mates, who then very quickly disappeared. Now it was just me and him. I was even more uncomfortable. He proceeded to tell me he was really into me, even though he was a good 3 years older, and wanted to finish the trip on a high. He started to lead me off towards the woods and further away from everyone else. I was inwardly panicking, freaking out and not knowing what to say or do. I was in shock and frightened. Whenever I tried to pull my hand away, he would just hold it even tighter. He stared forwards and kept telling me how beautiful I was, and he couldn't wait to have some alone time. At 12 years old, even still, I knew this was the last thing I wanted. I felt that if I really went with him, it wouldn't end well, but I was too scared to know what to do. I didn't feel I could get away, even if I tried to. And then he started to sing along to a song from the disco, which was quietly becoming fainter and fainter the farther away we got. I was terrified. Is this the way to Amarillo? I was terrified. I couldn't see any way out. In the midst of my panic, suddenly I heard something that made me filled with utter relief. The boys from the troop came marching out, calling me and walking over towards us. At this moment, he let go of my hand. As soon as I felt him let go, I ran to the boys I knew, and they took me back to our camp. The next day we were leaving, and I was very relieved. We were waiting to get on the minibus home, when I suddenly heard his voice behind me. He told me he had a great night, and it was such a shame we got interrupted. He asked for my number too. This was before cell phones though, so he wanted my home number. Thankfully, one of the boys in my group stepped up and answered for me, told him off and told him no. It was best that he would leave me alone from now on. I'm 27 now, but I still can't listen to that song. If I hear it, my body is filled with dread and I feel sick. Thankfully though, I never saw him again, and to be honest, I hope I never do. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you so much for watching this far, especially if you made it to the end of the video. If you have any criticisms or comments you'd like to share with me, please be sure to leave those in the comments below. I would just like to let you guys know, for a little bit of an update, that I am planning to continue streaming. I'm not sure how often, probably in between the days that I record videos or something, but Ghosts of Tsushima just came in, so I'm pretty excited about that. I kind of want to start from the beginning and let you guys share the experience with me. So hopefully I can get that set up soon and my internet doesn't keep crapping out in the middle of the stream like it did the last time. In addition to that, I've been talking a little bit with my friend, and I was thinking about maybe opening up a second channel where I do readings that are not horror related so much. Just reading various web novels I'm interested in, or maybe doing some fan dubs of comics or something like that, or just reading other general Reddit threads that are a little more funny and not as serious as the stuff I normally read. Let me know if you guys would be interested in that, and I'll think about doing that soon. I'll probably make a couple of test videos and release those next week, so I'll have a link to those as soon as those are ready. As always, the links to all of my social media are in the description below. If you would like to contact me, please be sure to take a look, as it contains my Facebook, Gmail, Twitter, and my Twitch account, which I'm planning to be using in conjunction with my YouTube streaming, so I'll actually be on that more. Fair warning ahead though guys, I don't respond as much on Facebook, so if you want to get a hold of me a lot easier, be sure to email me or send me a message on Twitter, because I usually respond to those as soon as I can right away, but sometimes it takes me a little bit longer to respond to the Facebook ones. If you have a story that you'd like me to read, or you have a story that you'd like to send in yourself, please be sure to send me an email at bluespookyreadings@gmail.com. It's also listed in the description of the video. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in, the title of the story if it has one, and the theme if it has one as well. Please be sure when you're sending your stories that they're not too grammatically incorrect so that I can still read them. Also, please make sure they're at least a couple of paragraphs long and include as much detail as you remember and are comfortable sharing, because if they're too short, sometimes I get stories that are only like a paragraph long or so, and those are a little too short to be read in a video, because they only take me about 30 seconds to a minute to read, so yeah.